Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The town of Umuchukwu was a place where tradition and modernity wove themselves into a delicate dance. Nestled in the southeastern part of Nigeria, it was a town of red earth roads, towering baobab trees, and the sweet scent of roasted corn drifting from roadside stalls. In this town, respect for elders was a virtue, and a mother's sacrifice was a song sung in the whispers of the wind. Among the many sons of Umuchukwu, one name was spoken with admiration: Chuka Okafor. Born to Mama Chuka, Amaka Okafor, a resilient widow who had single-handedly raised him after his father's untimely death, Chuka was a boy blessed by the gods. He was intelligent, ambitious, and carried the charm of a man destined for greatness. The people of Umuchukwu adored him, not just because he was one of their own, but because he had done what many could only dream of. He had left the confines of the town, built a successful business in Lagos, and returned with the confidence of a man who had conquered the world. Every December, when the festive winds of Christmas brought the sons and daughters of Umuchukwu back home, Chuka arrived in a convoy of gleaming cars, distributing crisp naira notes to the village children who followed him with wide, eager eyes. He was the pride of his people, the beacon of hope for struggling mothers who saw their sons in him. But beneath the adoration and admiration, there was an unspoken truth. His mother was his foundation. Mama Chuka was the woman who had fought the world to ensure he had everything he needed. She sold akra by the roadside, fetched water for lazy neighbors in exchange for a few naira, and scrubbed floors in the wealthier parts of town. She had worn the same wrapper for years, patched and repatched, because every kobo she earned went into Chuka's education. And Chuka had never forgotten. Or so the town believed. A son's promise. As a boy, Chuka had stood beneath the old baobab tree in their compound, his small hands in his mother's calloused palms, and made a promise. "Mama, when I grow up, I will buy you the biggest house in this town. You will never carry firewood again." Mama Chuka had smiled, her eyes filled with both hope and pain. "My son, just grow up to be a good man. That is all I ask." And so he did. At least, in the eyes of the world. The city that changed him. Lagos had a way of reshaping men. It took boys from humble villages and placed them in a world of fast cars, high-rise buildings, and endless temptations. Chuka had thrived in the city, building a lucrative real estate business that catapulted him into wealth. But wealth came with a price, and the price was change. At first, the changes were subtle. His Igbo accent softened, his visits home became less frequent, and his calls to his mother dwindled. Then, the changes became sharper. His clothes became foreign brands, his wrist dripped with gold, and his laughter, once full and free, became measured and calculated. And then came Ifeoma, the woman who clouded his eyes. She was unlike any woman he had ever known. Ifeoma was beautiful in a way that made men forget themselves. She was tall, with flawless caramel skin and eyes that held secrets. Her lips curved in a way that made words sound like honey, and when she walked, the world seemed to pause. She was also dangerous. Not in the way of violence, but in the way a fire slowly consumes a home before anyone realizes the smoke is too thick to escape. From the moment she entered Chuka's life, she changed him. "Your mother is too controlling," she would say. "She still sees you as a village boy. You're a man now, Chuka. A successful man." Chuka, once a boy who would have fought the world for his mother, began to believe that perhaps Ifeoma was right. When Mama Chuka called, Ifeoma rolled her eyes. "She calls too much," she sighed. "You're not a child, Chuka. She needs to understand that you belong to me now." And slowly, without realizing it, Chuka began to pull away from the woman who had given him life. A mother's concern. Mama Chuka was no fool. She had seen enough in her 55 years to recognize the scent of trouble. The first time she met Ifeoma, she knew. A mother's heart knows when her son is in danger, even if the danger wears a smile and sweet perfume. Chuka had brought Ifeoma home for Christmas. introducing her with the pride of a man who believed he had found love. Mama Chuka watched her, noting the way Ifeoma barely greeted the elders, how she frowned at the village food, and how she held Chuka's arm as though he were a trophy and not a man. "My son," she had said later that night when they were alone, "this girl, are you sure she is the one?" Chuka had frowned. "Mama, what kind of question is that? Of course, she is the one." Mama Chuka sighed. "I have lived long enough to know that not every woman who smiles at you means you well." Chuka's face hardened. "Mama, you don't know her. You're judging her because she is not like the village girls you're used to?" Mama Chuka said nothing more. She knew her son well enough to know that when love blinded a man, words meant nothing. She would have to wait. But waiting, as it turned out, would cost her more than she could ever imagine. Signs of distance. The following months confirmed Mama Chuka's fears. Chuka stopped visiting as often. When he did, he was always in a hurry to leave. The long conversations they once had turned into brief phone calls filled with rushed responses. And then, one evening when she called to check on him, he did something he had never done before. "Mama, I'm busy. Stop calling all the time." The words stung. Mama Chuka sat in silence after the call ended, her heart heavy. Something had changed in her son, and she feared it was something she could never undo. The birthday invitation. Months later, an invitation arrived. It was for Ifeoma's birthday party in Lagos, an event that promised extravagance and luxury. Chuka had sent a message, short and distant. "Mama, Ifeoma wants you to come for her birthday. It's important." Mama Chuka hesitated. She was not a woman of parties. Her place was in the home, in the heart of the family. But something in her heart told her to go. Perhaps, if she went, she would understand the grip this woman had on her son. Perhaps, if she went, she could remind Chuka of who he truly was. She did not know it yet, but her decision to attend that party would change everything. Love, or something like it. Lagos had always been a city of chaos and dreams. The streets never slept, the air was thick with ambition, and in the midst of it all, Chuka Okafor found himself ensnared by a woman who redefined his world. Ifeoma Naji was not just any woman, she was the woman. The kind of woman who could turn a simple walk into a runway show, the kind who made other women glance at themselves and wonder what they were missing. She was bold, intelligent, and dangerous in a way that didn't involve knives or guns, but in the way she could rearrange a man's entire existence without lifting a finger. From the moment Chuka met her at a high-profile business conference in Victoria Island, he was gone. She didn't fawn over him the way other women did. She didn't giggle unnecessarily or act impressed by his wealth. Instead, she watched him with a smirk, her wine glass swirling in delicate fingers. "I've heard about you, Mr. Okafor," she said that evening. "The golden boy from Umuchukwu. Lagos must be treating you well." Chuka chuckled, intrigued. "And what have you heard? That you're one of the few men who made it out of the village without letting it hold you back." The words were meant as a compliment, but something about them didn't sit right with him. Yet he didn't dwell on it. He was too busy drinking in the way her lips moved when she spoke, how she held herself like a queen among mere mortals. By the end of the night, she had given him her number, not because he had begged, but because she had decided he was worthy. And from that moment, Ifeoma became the center of his universe. The slow isolation. Falling for Ifeoma was easy. Too easy. She was everything Lagos celebrated. A woman who knew how to command a room, who spoke with confidence, who moved through life as though the world owed her a throne. At first, she was gentle in her takeover. When they began dating, she subtly adjusted things in his life. She helped him choose better suits, introduced him to finer restaurants, and taught him how to enjoy the luxuries of his wealth in a way that made him feel as though he had been living wrong all along. Then came the more obvious changes. "Babe, do you really have to go to Umuchukwu every Christmas?" she asked one evening as they lay in his penthouse, watching the city lights. Chuka frowned. "Of course. It's home." Ifeoma sighed, playing with his fingers. "I get that. But honestly, it's not like your mother needs you there all the time. She should understand that you're a busy man now." Chuka hesitated. "She raised me alone. I can't just abandon her." Ifeoma pouted, tracing small circles on his chest. No one is saying you should abandon her, love. I'm just saying, maybe it's time she understands that you're no longer a village boy. Chuka didn't respond, but the words stayed with him. And slowly, over time, the phone calls to his mother became less frequent. The trips home became shorter. The gap between the man he once was and the man Ifeoma was shaping him into widened. Red flags in plain sight. Mama Chuka, like all mothers, sensed the shift. The first time she met Ifeoma, she knew. The girl barely greeted properly. She walked into the house like she was stepping onto a stage, barely acknowledging the old photographs on the walls, the clay pots, the scent of home-cooked food. Mama Chuka watched her, saw the way she held Chuka's hand not with love, but with possession. She had seen women like this before, women who loved men not for who they were, but for what they could be shaped into. She tried to speak to Chuka later that evening. "My son, I do not think this girl is for you." Chuka scoffed. "Mama, you don't even know her." Mama Chuka sighed. "I know her kind." Chuka's face darkened. "Mama, you always think village women are better. The world is different now." Mama Chuka said nothing. She had raised this boy alone, carried him on her back when he was sick, fed him with her last kobo, and yet here he was, treating her as though she was an old relic from a past life. She prayed that night. Prayed that whatever spell had been cast over her son would break before it was too late. The warning signs. The warnings kept coming, but Chuka was blind to them. His childhood friend, Obina, tried to speak sense into him one afternoon at a lounge in Lekki. "Chuka, I don't like this girl, man," Obina said, sipping his drink. "She's changing you." Chuka laughed. "Change is good." Obina shook his head. "Not when it makes you forget where you came from." Chuka rolled his eyes. "Not this talk again." Obina leaned forward. "Bro, when was the last time you called your mother?" Chuka shifted uncomfortably. "That woman sacrificed everything for you, and now you act like she's an inconvenience." Chuka's jaw tightened. "Ifeoma is my future. My mother needs to understand that." Obina exhaled, frustrated. "You need to understand something too, my guy. Women like Ifeoma, they don't build with you. They consume you." But Chuka didn't listen. He had made his choice. The party that would change everything. Weeks later, Ifeoma's birthday was announced like a royal event. It was to be held at a 5-star hotel in Victoria Island. The guest list was filled with celebrities, socialites, and politicians. It was the kind of event where people arrived in luxury cars and wore designer outfits worth more than the average person's yearly salary. Ifeoma insisted that Chuka invite his mother. "She should see the life you're living now," she said with a smirk. Chuka was hesitant. His mother was a simple woman. She wouldn't fit into a place like that. But Ifeoma was persistent. She should come. It will be good for her. So, against his better judgment, Chuka sent his mother an invitation. And Mama Chuka, despite all the signs telling her not to, decided to go. She packed her best wrapper, the one she had been saving for a special occasion, and carried with her a modest gift, a handmade bead bracelet, crafted with love. She did not know that her presence at that party would ignite a storm that would shake everything to its core. She did not know that before the night was over, her son would raise his hand against her in front of everyone. But the gods knew. And they were watching. A mother's journey to a different world. Mama Chuka had never been to Lagos before. She had heard about its noise, its speed, its endless hunger for wealth, but she had never set foot in the city herself. The moment she stepped out of the old bus that brought her from Umuchukwu, Lagos greeted her with a suffocating embrace. Horns blared from every direction, people moved as if they were being chased, and the air smelled of a mixture of fried plantain, exhaust fumes, and sweat. She clutched her small bag tightly, her heart pounding. Everything about this place felt foreign, cold, and unwelcoming. "Madam, you dey find taxi?" a young man with sunken eyes and an aggressive tone asked. Mama Chuka shook her head and walked quickly away, mumbling a prayer under her breath. After several attempts, she finally found a cab willing to take her to the Grand Hotel where her son's fiancée was hosting her birthday. As the car moved through the city, Mama Chuka looked out the window at the towering buildings, the flashing billboards, the streets filled with restless bodies chasing something she couldn't quite name. She clutched the small package in her lap, a delicate bead bracelet she had made herself. It was a simple gift, but one filled with love. As she approached the hotel, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Something about this night felt wrong. The grand entrance. The hotel was unlike anything Mama Chuka had ever seen. It stretched high into the sky, its glass walls reflecting the shimmering lights of Lagos. The entrance was decorated with a long red carpet, and expensive cars lined the driveway. Mama Chuka stepped out of the taxi, adjusting her wrapper. She had chosen her finest outfit, a deep blue ochre dress that had been sewn years ago but still carried its beauty. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Immediately she felt out of place. Women in expensive gowns floated past her, their perfumes thick and suffocating. Men in designer suits clutched glasses of champagne, laughing loudly as if the world belonged to them. Mama Chuka swallowed. This was not her world. A young woman at the entrance, dressed in an all-black uniform, stopped her. "Madam, invitation?" Mama Chuka fumbled with her bag and pulled out the card Chuka had sent her. The woman glanced at it, hesitated, and then let her in with a forced smile. As she stepped inside, Mama Chuka's eyes widened. The hall was decorated like something out of a fairy tale. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling, ice sculptures stood in the corners, and waiters moved around carrying trays of food she couldn't even name. She spotted Chuka at the far end of the hall, standing with Ifeoma. Her heart swelled. Her son looked so handsome, dressed in a fitted suit, his face glowing with confidence. She smiled and stepped forward. A mother's love, a woman's disdain. Ifeoma was the first to see her. Her perfectly arched eyebrows lifted in surprise, then in annoyance. She leaned in and whispered something to Chuka. Chuka turned, his eyes landing on his mother. His expression was unreadable. Mama Chuka smiled, moving closer. "My son," she said warmly, "happy birthday to your wife-to-be." Ifeoma crossed her arms, tilting her head. "Fiancé," she corrected coldly. Mama Chuka nodded, unbothered. "I brought a small gift," she said, reaching into her bag and pulling out the bracelet wrapped in brown paper. She extended it toward Ifeoma. Ifeoma stared at it, then let out a soft, mocking laugh. "What is this?" Mama Chuka smiled proudly. "I made it myself. It is a special bead, blessed by tradition. It carries." Ifeoma's laughter grew louder. A few nearby guests turned to watch. "Chuka," she said, turning to him, "your mother brought me a bracelet made from village beads?" Chuka looked at the small package in his mother's hand. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. A memory, perhaps, of all the times she had sacrificed for him. But Ifeoma's hand on his arm tightened, her nails pressing into his skin. "Say something," she whispered. Chuka swallowed. "Mama," he said, his voice lower now, This is not the place for such gifts." Mama Chuka blinked. "My son, look around," he continued, his voice firmer. "This is a high-class event. Ifeoma doesn't wear things like this." Mama Chuka's smile faded. "I made it with love," she said softly. Ifeoma scoffed. "Love? Love is not enough, ma. This is Lagos, not your village. Next time, please buy something appropriate." A few people chuckled nearby. Mama Chuka's heart clenched. Her son had changed. She wanted to turn and leave, but something inside her would not let her. "My son," she said, her voice shaking, "you were not raised like this." The laughter around them grew quieter. A few people sensed the tension now. "Please," Chuka hissed, glancing around. "I won't be quiet," she said. "I raised you to be a man of honor. But look at you, treating me like a stranger because of a woman." If she had stopped there, perhaps the night would have ended differently. But she turned to Ifeoma, her old mother's eyes sharp. "You are destroying my son," she said. Ifeoma stiffened. Chuka's chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. "Enough." Mama Chuka shook her head. "I will not be silent while my son loses himself. Ifeoma, you may be beautiful, but a woman who separates a son from his mother." Slap. The sound cut through the room like thunder. Gasps filled the air. Mama Chuka's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning. She reached up, touching her face, her eyes wide in shock. She had never in her life imagined that her own son, her flesh and blood, would raise his hand against her. But he had. And the entire room had seen it. Silence fell over the hall. Even Ifeoma, for all her sharp words, looked momentarily stunned. Chuka stood frozen, his hands still raised slightly, as if even he couldn't believe what he had done. Mama Chuka took a slow step back. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She simply looked at her son, not with anger, but with deep, heartbreaking disappointment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. The crowd parted for her as she moved, the once proud mother now a shadow of the woman who had entered the hall just moments ago. And as she disappeared into the night, Chuka felt something deep inside him crack. But it was too late. He had made his choice. And the gods were watching. The silence that screamed. The party had ended, but the echoes of the slap remained. Long after the guests had left, long after the music had faded, and long after the last champagne flute had been cleared, Chuka sat alone in his penthouse, staring at his hands. Those hands, the same hands that once carried firewood for his mother, the same hands that once wiped her tears when she struggled to pay his school fees, had struck her. His mother. A deep, ugly silence filled the apartment. Ifeoma was in the bedroom, humming softly as she removed her makeup, completely unbothered by what had happened. But the world outside was not silent. The moment the slap had landed, social media had exploded. Videos had been taken, whispers had turned into roaring condemnations. The news had spread like wildfire. Chuka Okafor slapped his own mother at his fiancée's birthday party. The same mother who raised him alone. The same mother who made sacrifices for him. By morning his name was everywhere. And not in a good way. The backlash begins. It started with the calls. His phone vibrated endlessly. Friends, business partners, family members. He ignored them all. Then came the news articles. Golden boy of Umuchukwu falls from grace. Chuka Okafor, a son without honor. Even his business partners in Lagos, the men who once praised him, who toasted to his success over expensive whiskey, were now distancing themselves. Chuka, one of them had called that afternoon, his voice tight. You need to fix this. Fast. Brands don't want to be associated with someone who disrespects their mother. It's bad for business. We have investors watching. Then the call ended. Chuka sat in silence, feeling the world shift beneath his feet. He had built himself from nothing. But in one night he had destroyed himself. A son without a mother. Meanwhile, in Umuchukwu, Mama Chuka was nowhere to be found. She had returned home the morning after the party, but she did not speak to anyone. The neighbors noticed. The town noticed. The once lively woman, who was always full of warmth, now sat in the corner of her small home, staring into space. When women from the village came to check on her, she barely spoke. She is broken, they whispered. Her only son has disgraced her. Days passed. She refused to eat. She refused to leave the house. And most importantly, she refused to answer Chuka's calls. The woman who never loved him. Ifeoma, on the other hand, did not care. While the world was on fire around them, she continued as if nothing had happened. Babe, let's take a trip, she said one evening, sipping a cocktail. Dubai or maybe the Maldives. We need to get away from this drama. Chuka looked at her, his stomach twisting. This woman, the woman he had chosen over his mother, did not even care that his world was crumbling. She did not care that he was losing everything. She only cared about what he could give her. It hit him all at once. She never truly loved him. She loved his money, his status, his ability to give her the life she wanted. And now, as the weight of his actions crushed him, she wanted to escape. Chuka exhaled. I can't just run away from this, Ifeoma. She rolled her eyes. It's just bad press. It will pass. Bad press? She truly did not understand. His hands clenched into fists. My mother is not talking to me. My business is collapsing. And you think this will pass? Ifeoma sighed dramatically, setting down her drink. Honestly, Chuka, I think you're overreacting. She's just being emotional. She'll get over it. Chuka felt sick. His mother, the woman who had suffered for him, was now just being emotional? His jaw tightened. I need to go see her. Ifeoma scoffed. Are you serious? After everything? She disrespected me at my birthday. If anything, she should be apologizing to you. Something inside Chuka snapped. He stood up, his heart racing. She is my mother. His voice was low, but filled with an anger he hadn't felt before. Ifeoma rolled her eyes. And I am your future? Chuka stared at her for a long moment. Then, with a sudden, terrifying clarity, he realized something. Ifeoma was never his future. She was his mistake. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door. He did not take his phone. He did not take his wallet. He just walked. And for the first time in years, he was going home. The long road to redemption. The journey back to Umuchukwu was long, but Chuka did not sleep. The farther he got from Lagos, the more he felt the weight on his chest. He had betrayed the woman who gave him life. He had let a stranger take her place. As the bus rolled into Umuchukwu, he felt a deep, aching fear settle inside him. What if she refused to see him? What if she never forgave him? What if it was too late? But there was only one way to find out. As he walked the familiar path to his childhood home, memories came rushing back. The small house. The old baobab tree. And then, his mother. She was sitting outside, her eyes distant, her face thinner than he remembered. She saw him. But she did not smile. She did not speak. She simply looked at him, her silence sharper than any slap. Chuka felt his knees go weak. He sank to the ground before her, his heart breaking. Mama, he whispered. She did not respond. Tears blurred his vision. Mama, please. Silence. Not anger. Not hatred. Just silence. And somehow, that was worse. Chuka bowed his head, pressing his forehead to the dirt. I am sorry, he said, his voice breaking. The woman who had raised him, who had loved him, who had fought for him, was now beyond his reach. And he did not know if he would ever get her back. The weight of silence. Chuka had imagined this moment in so many different ways. He had envisioned his mother breaking down in tears and embracing him. He had pictured her anger, shouting at him for the disgrace he had brought upon her. He had even imagined her refusing to let him into the house at first. But he had never imagined this. Silence. A silence so heavy it made the earth beneath him feel unsteady. He remained on his knees, his forehead pressed against the dusty ground, as if the very soil of Umuchukwu could absorb his shame. But Mama Chuka did not move. She simply sat there, her frail hands folded in her lap, her face devoid of emotion. Chuka lifted his head slowly, his heart pounding. Mama? No response. The woman who had once spoken to him in lullabies, who had filled his childhood with warmth, now acted as though he did not exist. The silence was worse than any insult, any curse, any punishment she could have given him. And it shattered him. The eyes of the village. The village had been watching. As soon as Chuka had stepped off the bus, the whispers had begun. The prodigal son has returned. After everything, he dares to show his face? Does he think an apology will fix this? Now, as he knelt before his mother, the women gathering at the roadside did not interfere. They simply watched. Because this was no longer a private matter. It was a lesson that every child of Umuchukwu would remember. The plea of a broken man. Mati, please, Chuka begged, his voice shaking. I was wrong. I let the world blind me. I forgot what really mattered. Nothing. Tears burned his eyes. I am ashamed of myself. I have lost everything, Mama. My business, my reputation. But the only thing that truly matters is... His voice broke. A flicker of something passed through Mama Chuka's eyes. But still, she did not speak. Chuka pressed his palms together. I am your son. Your only son. Please, speak to me. Mama Chuka inhaled deeply but remained silent. She did not turn away. But she did not forgive him either. A mother's grief. For 3 days, Chuka remained in the village, waiting for his mother to speak. Each morning, he would wake early, sweep the compound, fetch water, and cook, trying to undo years of neglect with acts of service. But Mama Chuka remained distant. She did not push him away. But she did not acknowledge him either. On the third night, after a long day of tending to the small farm she kept at the back of the house, she sat beneath the old baobab tree, gazing at the stars. Chuka sat a few feet away, watching her. Finally, he gathered the courage to ask the question that had haunted him. "Mama, do you hate me?" Mama Chuka let out a long, weary sigh. "I could never hate my own blood," she said softly. Chuka felt relief wash over him. She had spoken. But before he could celebrate, she continued. "I do not hate you, Chuka. But I do not recognize you either." Her words sliced through him like a blade. "You are my son, but you are also a stranger to me now." She turned to face him. For the first time since he had arrived, she truly looked at him. "I raised you to be a man of honor, to be a man who respects his roots, who understands the weight of family. But the man I saw in Lagos," she shook her head, "that was not the boy I raised." Chuka swallowed hard. "Mama, I can change?" Mama Chuka looked up at the sky. "Change is not a promise, my son. It is a path you must walk, the test of redemption." The following morning, as the sun rose over the red earth of Umuchukwu, Mama Chuka stood before her son. "If you truly seek redemption, then you must be willing to humble yourself," she said. Chuka nodded eagerly. "I'll do anything, Mama." Her eyes held no softness. "Then stay." Chuka blinked. "Stay?" She folded her arms. "Live as you once did. Not as the man Lagos made you, but as the boy who once carried firewood for his mother." He understood immediately. She was asking him to strip himself of his pride, his wealth, his comfort, to return to the essence of who he truly was. And if he truly meant his apology, he would do it. The humbling of a son. For weeks, Chuka remained in the village. He worked the land, just as he had when he was a boy. He fetched water. He greeted elders with humility. He sat with the village men, listening, learning. The people of Umuchukwu watched closely. Some mocked him. Others respected him. But all of them knew that redemption was not given, it was earned. And so he earned it. Day by day, Chuka chipped away at the man he had become, until only the son of Mama Chuka remained. And slowly, ever so slowly, his mother began to speak to him again. The breaking point. One evening as they sat outside, Mama Chuka finally asked, "What happened to the woman?" Chuka knew she meant Ifeoma. "She is gone," he said simply. Mama Chuka nodded, unsurprised. Women like that do not build homes. They build palaces for themselves and leave once the gold fades. Chuka exhaled. "I see that now." His mother studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she did something she hadn't done since that night in Lagos. She reached out and touched his hand. Chuka froze. Her hands were still rough from years of labor, still warm, still filled with the same love that had carried him through life. And in that touch, he knew he had been forgiven. Tears filled his eyes. "Mama, I am sorry." She nodded, squeezing his hand. "I know, my son." And with those words, the weight that had been crushing him finally lifted. The son reborn. The next morning, Chuka made a decision. "I want to rebuild my life," he told his mother. "But I will do it the right way this time." Mama Chuka smiled for the first time in a long while. "Then do it with honor, my son." And as Chuka looked out at the village he had once been so eager to leave, he realized something. He had been searching for success in the wrong places. True wealth was not in Lagos, in business deals, or in luxury. It was in family, in respect, in legacy. And this time he would build something that no woman, no mistake, and no amount of money could ever take away. He would build a name worth remembering. A new beginning. The morning air in Umuchukwu smelled of damp earth and freshly cut palm fronds. Birds chirped in the distance, and the soft rhythm of a woman pounding yam echoed from a nearby compound. Chuka stood outside his mother's house, watching the sunrise, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For weeks, he had humbled himself before his people. For weeks, he had worked the land, fetched water, and listened, really listened, to the wisdom of the elders he once ignored. He had spent the last few days rebuilding the small house his mother had lived in for decades, making sure every brick, every nail, every tile was laid with care. He was still a man of wealth, but now he was a man of purpose. And today, he would take the next step in restoring his honor. The return to Lagos. The village had begun to accept him again, but there was one more battle he needed to fight. His business, his name, his legacy. Chuka had built an empire in Lagos, but after the slap that shattered his reputation, he had lost nearly everything. Investors had pulled out. Clients had distanced themselves. His once loyal employees had started looking for other jobs. If he was going to rebuild, he had to return not as the arrogant man who left, but as the humbled man who had learned his lesson. His mother watched him pack a small bag. "You are ready," she said simply. Chuka turned to her, searching her eyes for any trace of hesitation. "You believe in me, Mama?" She smiled, a real smile this time. "You are my son. I always have." His heart swelled. He bent down and touched her feet, a gesture of deep respect. "Bless me, Mama." She placed her hands on his head. "The gods walk with you, my son. Go, and do not forget who you are again." Confronting the past. Lagos had not changed in the weeks he had been gone. The city still hummed with ambition, traffic still clogged the roads, and the hunger for success still danced in the air. But Chuka had changed. When he arrived at his company's headquarters, he saw the uncertainty in his employees' eyes. Would he be the same man? Would he crumble under pressure? He walked into the boardroom, where his business partners, once his closest allies, sat waiting. They did not greet him with the warmth they once had. "Chuka," one of them said, arms crossed, "why should we trust you again?" He took a deep breath. "I cannot erase my mistake," he said, his voice steady. "But I can prove to you that I am not the man I was before." He laid out a plan, a vision of rebuilding not just his company, but his reputation. He spoke with humility, not arrogance. And one by one, they listened. By the time the meeting ended, the tension had lifted. "Let's take it one step at a time," one of the senior investors finally said. It was not a full restoration, but it was a start. And for the first time in weeks, Chuka felt hope. The final goodbye to Ifeoma. There was one last thing he had to do. Ifeoma had tried to reach out to him multiple times since he left Lagos. At first, she acted indifferent, pretending she had moved on. Then, as the news spread that he was regaining his business, her calls became more frequent. When he finally agreed to meet her, she arrived in a designer dress, her makeup flawless, her confidence still intact. "Chuka," she purred, reaching for his hand. "I knew you'd come back." He pulled away gently. "I came to say goodbye, Ifeoma." She frowned, tilting her head. "Goodbye? Don't be ridiculous. We can still—" "No," he said firmly. "We cannot." For the first time, she looked nervous. "Chuka, listen. I was just trying to help you become a better man. You're successful because of me." Chuka chuckled, a sad, tired laugh. "I was successful before you. And I will be successful without you." Her lips parted, searching for words. But he had already turned to leave. And this time he would not look back. The man he had become. Months passed. Chuka did not just regain his business. He redefined it. He poured his wealth back into his community, building schools, funding businesses for young entrepreneurs, and creating opportunities for those who had none. His story had once been one of disgrace. Now it was one of redemption. And in Umuchukwu, where the baobab tree still stood strong, his mother watched from afar, her heart full of pride. Chuka had not just restored his name. He had become the man she always prayed he would be. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.